Okay, so there are two ways to read Pamela. One is the way the book seems to want us to read it. The book wants us to read Pamela as a story of this young woman who writes letters to her family about her situation. Incidentally, it's being a collection of letters that is what makes it an epistolary novel. And it's this attempt at sort of replicating realistic narratives that, like Moll Flanders was a pretend autobiography. This is a pretend correspondence. So the story of this woman who's writing letters to her family about protecting her virtue, and then she's rewarded, and then she's really happy. That's how we read the book. We're very sympathetic with to Pamela. We're very pleased when she gets married, and we're very happy for her in the way her marriage plays out. I will say, in defense of the last part of the book, that novels were still being invented, and it wasn't just clear that the novel should be over once they got married. So there is some formal, like, genre thing here that hadn't been worked out. Okay. However, a more interesting reason to read or reading of Pamela is to read against the grain. A lot of critics have pointed out how Pamela seems very vain. She talks a lot about her clothes and about how people think she's so beautiful. She also keeps letters. At some point, she keeps them in her clothing, like she sews them into her clothes. And then the text that we read, the body of text becomes like the body of Pamela. So she's writing to us, and we become, in that way, the same audience that, as her parents are. But then we become this other very sensual audience when she's writing letters that start getting sewn into parts of her clothes. She talks about Mr. B ripping open her dresses in ways that are, of course, assault, but she doesn't. But then she'll say something about how beautiful her breasts were, or something like that. And if you got to want to see it, but if you look for it, there are ways in which you can read this as a story of a servant who's a little vain and a little naive. And then the story looks really different. You don't have to read it that way, and I'm not telling you to, but the tension between those two readings is an easy way to get really invested in the story. The parody we're going to read of Pamela is written by Henry Fielding, whom I'll talk more about when we get there. Is one of the most famous parodies, and it's called Shamala. And the story in Shamala is that Pamela's pretending to be virtuous in order to reel Mr. B in. And Mr. B is called Mr. Booby in this one because he's such a boob. And in Shamala, finally she convinces him to marry her, even though she's pregnant with the person's baby. And she talks about their relative, the sizes of their manhoods. And it's really funny, but it's also picking up on, as even 18th century readers did, this tension between what Pamela, the book, and Pamela, the character, seem to want us to find, and the way in which we're, just in order to understand Mr. B's desire, but also to desire the book and Pamela itself and herself, find her attractive. So she's the narrator here, and she needs to tell us how attractive and appealing she is, which works sometimes better and sometimes worse, which is a tension that, as I said, 18th century readers picked up on also. That, I hope, is one way of reading the novel as non-painfully, even enjoyably as possible. I will say, I made a joke about this, but the book gets better and better every time you read it, because this tension becomes more obvious for me. And then the other thing that I'll say about Pamela is that, I mean, this is true of any book, but the link that I sent you weeks ago about LibriVox, and it's recordings of books, audio recordings, is that what they're called? Audiobooks. This would be a good one to use. The recording of Pamela would be a good one to use if you didn't use it from Wall Flanders, because even if you're not taking notes while you listen to the book, you can go through your day getting through pages and pages and pages, especially at the end when she's getting her list of sweet injunctions, which even on a 10th reading or so is hard to get through. Okay, good, maybe? Let's hope so.